Poštovane gledateljice i gledatelji, ja sam Zorana Kujundžić, a vi pratite vijesti emisije Cenzura. Europska unija je 10. prosinca obilježila Dan ljudskih prava. Tema ovogodišnjeg Dana ljudskih prava je uključenost i sudjelovanje u javnom životu. Tim povodom visoka predstavnica Europske unije Catherine Ashton ukazala na postignuća Unije na području ljudskih prava u protekloj godini. Europska unija je usvojila strategiju o ljudskim pravima kako bi poboljšala djelotvornost i dosljednost europske politike ljudskih prava u čitavom nizu svojih aktivnosti. Imenovan je prvi posebni predstavnik Europske unije za ljudska prava, gospodin Stavros Lambrinidis, kako bi promicao ljudska prava kroz dijalog s trećim zemljama i međunarodnim organizacijama, naglasila je Ashton. Izabrani predstavnik za ljudska prava, gospodin Lambrinidis, rekao je kako bismo na 10. prosinca ove godine trebali gledati kao na novi početak za taj univerzalni izazov i zaključio je da na Dan ljudskih prava ne trebamo upirati prstom, već se udružiti u zajedničkom nastojanju da svakoj ženi i svakom muškarcu omogućimo da sudjeluju u oblikovanju svojeg vlastitog života i života svoje sredine i svojega društva. U proteklom tjednu također je u svijetu obilježen još jedan važan datum. Međunarodni dan borbe protiv korupcije koji se obilježava 9. prosinca na dan kada je 2003. godine u Meridi u Meksiku potpisana Konvencija Ujedinjenih naroda protiv korupcije. Među prvim potpisnicima bila je i Hrvatska, koja je kao 14. zemlja konvenciju ratificirala 2005. godine. Kako je navedeno u preambuli konvencije, ona je međunarodni odgovor na korupciju kao nadnacionalni fenomen koji utječe na sva društva i sva gospodarstva, tako da je za njenu prevenciju i kontrolu ključna uspostava međunarodne suradnje. To je prvi globalni pravni instrument usmjeren protiv korupcije i sveobuhvatni dokument koji uključuje mjere prevencije i kriminalizacije korupcije, kao i međunarodnu suradnju na njenom suzbijanju. Borba protiv korupcije također je jedan od prioriteta vanjske i unutarnje politike Europske unije uz uspostavu mehanizama za učinkovitu provedbu antikorupcijske politike u zemljama članicama. Ekonomski troškovi uzrokovani korupcijom iznose oko 120 milijardi eura godišnje, a taj iznos otprilike odgovara 1% bruto nacionalnog proizvoda Europske unije, odnosno predstavlja nešto manje od godišnjeg proračuna Europske unije. Iz tog razloga ne čudi činjenica da svaki 4. građanin Europske unije smatra korupciju najvećim problemom u svojoj državi. Zbog navedenih činjenica, zastupnici u Europskom parlamentu pozvali su na snažnu političku volju te na vraćanje povjerenja građana i građanki u provedbu učinkovite antikorupcijske politike. Radio emisiju Eurolink u produkciji Cenzure Plus pratite svakog četvrtka na Radio Splitu u 18 sati i 40 minuta, a informirati se možete i putem web stranice na www.cenzura.hr. Vijesti su pripremljene uz potporu Europske unije u sklopu projekta Informiraj se i odluči, financiranog kroz program IPA Info 2010. Sadržaj vijesti odgovornost je Udruge za promicanje ljudskih prava i medijskih sloboda Cenzura Plus, te ne odražava nužno gledišta Europske unije.
PZ gleda vas 21 sekundu u tišini. Točno toliko godina PZ čeka priznanje svoje patnje. Ona je civilna žrtva rata. U ratu silovane i seksualno zlostavljane osobe imaju pravo na psihosocijalnu potporu, obeštećenje i trajnu materijalnu naknadu, te zaslužuju priznavanje svoje patnje u društvu. Žrtve su predugo čekale.
How you see the media freedoms and status of media in the United States of America today?
The United States has a free press, there's no question about that. So I think that media are free to report on what they want to report on. Yeah, I mean, that's the simple answer to that question.
Yeah, but certainly it's not without the problems. What you would point out as the main problems of media status and media freedoms in USA today?
There's a serious financial problem. I mean, the advertising model no longer works. So, newspapers, television stations have counted on advertising as their main revenue source. That's going away, and no one's figured out the next way to fund journalism in America. So there's a struggle now. People, the phrase used is this is a transformative period. This transformation in this case means no one really knows what's next. And there are a lot of people worried. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of newspapers have either diminished their publication in some way, either in terms of pages or number of days they publish. Television is still making money. Television news is still making money. But newspapers are in serious trouble.
Is it a temporary problem related to recession, economical recession in the world, or you think it's a global trend that would end in the sense that the media advertisements would be lower and lower and the media needs to face with the completely new era of functioning?
Well, it's certainly with newspapers in the United States, it's not a problem that started with the recession. It started long before the recession. Circulation began to drop, advertising began to drop. It had to do with Craigslist, for example, taking all of the ads for people selling things. Monster.com took all the ads for people, the jobs wanted, part of a newspaper. I think once newspapers lose car dealerships in America and the big department stores, and that probably will happen eventually, there's nothing left. Then the whole thing collapses. So it's not related to the recession. It's a transformation that's happening, and it happened long before the recession. And it is global, but it really is country by country. The press in India, the newspapers in India are doing really, really well. Literacy is on the rise. Newspapers are succeeding. In other parts of the world, that's happening too. So I think, it really depends on what part of the world you're talking about.
What do you see as the development, as the future of profit media?
Well, I think there's no question that they're being financially harmed. I think the interesting thing to note is that despite the fact that these are businesses, obviously, and there are very bright people running these businesses, they really haven't figured out what to do. In the New York Times, the Washington Post, these big media companies, are facing serious financial difficulties. The Washington Post was getting around the financial difficulties related to journalism by setting up something called Kaplan, where they were training, it was like, the testing services, people who wanted to take these important tests in the United States, like this Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SATs. They were training people how to take those tests. They were making lots of money through their company called Kaplan. They were making money by diversifying, which is the way companies often make money, right? They weren't just solely focused on journalism. But no one, even at the highest levels, and I've been in conferences where people sit around and talk about who's going to pay for the news. But oftentimes in the room, there are not a lot of big strategic business thinkers. There are a lot of journalists talking about it. We need to bring in the best business minds in the world to say, how are we going to talk about the news? I mean, Google is optimistic about the future of journalism. They think...
In which sense?
They say that what will happen is, newspapers as a paper will go away, but news will always continue to exist. It'll just move. It'll transition to being mostly web-based, and those news outlets that do that web-based news will still make money somehow. I mean, that's what Google believes. That's what Google has said. Google wrote a thesis paper on this very issue. But nobody has come up with no one's going to set down the new business model for all of this. So it's still very, very uncertain.
When we talk about media, first, we think about profit media. But
right.
We have public media, and the media task is to inform and to educate and then to entertain.
Right.
How do you see the status of public media in the United States?
Well, public media plays a really important role. I mean, national public radio is probably one of the most well-established and best sources of news in the United States. Now, it doesn't do a lot of investigative reporting, unfortunately, but millions and millions of people turn to national public radio, partially funded by the government, mostly funded by individuals and by businesses that do the equivalent of advertising on national public radio. Public television is another story. Public television, despite the fact it should be filling this great gap that's been left by local television news not doing such a great job all across the United States, doesn't do much news. And they have one news show on national public television called Frontline, which does fantastic documentaries, award-winning investigative reporting. But other than that, at the local level across the United States, public television stations, there's some rare exceptions, just don't do very much news, which is unfortunate. They have focused on children's programming, shows like Sesame Street. They have focused on entertainment shows like Downton Abbey, which maybe you've heard of, maybe it's popular here, I don't know. And shows like that. They haven't done enough, and they should be doing more to bring more quality news, television news, to Americans.
Yeah, somehow when we think about media, we expect from public media to concern more about the themes and of the public interest and not the profit media. What you would say, where are those themes more represented in the United States, in profit or public media, and where the investigative journalism is more present?
Well, there's investigative reporting going on in all the sectors. There's investigative reporting going on in the for-profit sector. You see it in the major newspapers like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. You see it at some regional newspapers like the Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Times, but you don't see enough of it. Okay, so it is going on in for-profit newspapers. It's not going on much in for-profit radio, because in commercial radio, the format of how commercial radio news is done in very short snippets of news, 30 seconds. So you can't really do much investigative reporting in 30 seconds. So it doesn't. Right. So it is going on in local television. It is going on national television. Also, I mean, the television networks, they all have their investigative reporting units. Some stronger than others. The kind of investigative reporting they do is what I describe, I think what most people describe as reporting on the investigations of others. They'll get a leak from a law enforcement person or a big Justice Department investigation, and they'll report on that. Rarely do they do original investigative reporting. At the local television level, there are I was part of one, they're what's called I-teams, investigative teams. And some of them do really great work, and some of them do really, not so great work. And then getting back to public television, it is rare to find a public television doing local news in a city across America. The one mainstay of public television in terms of investigative reporting is that show Frontline.
And what United States are doing in sense of encouraging investigative journalism as important society corrective force? Are there any kind of structural initiatives to improve investigative journalism to support it in United States?
Well, the whole nonprofit movement, which we're a part of it, we began the history, of course, the history of nonprofit journalism goes back a long time, 35 years. 1977, the Center for Investigative Reporting in California. Nothing until 1990, the Center for Public Integrity in Washington. Nothing until 2007 or 8, when the Center for when ProPublica was established in New York. And then we launched our center, this New England Center for Investigative Reporting, in January of 2009. And that began a movement across America of nonprofit investigative reporting centers in regions all across the United States.
So you would say that the whole nonprofit sector kind of rise and strengthen in a sense of strengthening investigative journalism in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it rose out of the, I mean, it rose in some places it rose out of a situation where investigative reporters lost their jobs. In my case, I left my job because I wanted to create something. I could see investigative reporting either disappearing or getting dumber and dumber, especially at the television level. And I thought we need to leave this place, this TV station I was working at, create something that would ensure the survival of serious investigative reporting. And I think that was the impetus for many people across the country. So we established these centers where we're all doing strong investigative reporting. In our case, we're putting it out through mainstream media, television stations, radio stations, newspapers. But it's happening all across America. But if there hadn't been a void, if we didn't look at the landscape and say, investigative reporting is in jeopardy, we need to do something about it because we're passionate about this, then if that void didn't exist, this probably wouldn't have happened. So just like in a lot of situations, there was a crisis developing. And what's happened is a response to that crisis. Because, I mean, I believe, and I think all the people who've started these centers like ours all across the country believe, that investigative reporting is key to the survival of democracy. That without having investigative reporters keeping a close eye on big business, big government, big institutions, then democracy itself cannot survive. Without information, if citizens don't have information, they can't be participating in democracy. Democracy will unravel if that doesn't happen.
So United States has a good example of investigative journalism surviving within a non-profit media. And you brought up your own non-profit media. I mean, you were kind of establisher of New England Center for Investigative Journalism.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, going back historically, the process began, as I said, at a moment in time when myself and my coworker said to each other, you know, we need to get out of here. We need to, this place is going in the wrong direction. We need to create something. We had two choices. We had the choice of either staying there and wallowing in our misery, or creating something that essentially would fill the void. So the first thing that we did, we were inspired by an article that had been written by the founder of the Center for Public Integrity, Chuck Lewis, who's now on our advisory board, who had written an article saying the future of investigative reporting was in the nonprofit sector. So we wrote up a mission statement, you know, just our beliefs. It was, you know, we had no model to go on really. We just wrote a mission statement. We started showing it around to people, started talking to media outlets, and then started looking for money. You know, we made a connection with the university, which I think was a good idea. Then we started trying to find funding. And by a year later, this is a process that took a fair amount of time. By a year later, we found the funder, the Knight Foundation, God bless them. They gave us a $250,000 grant to get this thing started. And then we started doing our journalism. We just put it together. We came up with the name. We had just the two of us working at this. We brought students in to help us because we were based at a university. The university gave us some money. We started raising money from friends and family, individual donations, and then we just started doing the journalism. And then at some point we came to this realization, and the Knight Foundation helped us come to this realization when they said to us, look, we'll give you a second grant, but you got to start thinking about how you're going to survive without us. You know, and by that time we had started getting other grants, but we took their words very seriously, and we said, yeah, we need to think about how we can bring in revenue to survive. And, you know, and it came to us, and we probably should have thought about it before we actually did it.
How? Since you are a non-profit media, you know, you are not in the advertisements, you are not in the entertainment.
You know, and this is where it comes down to, you kind of ask yourself, okay, where are we? We're at a university. We're in a major American city with multiple educational institutions where many students all over America and the world want to come to. So we decided that first summer of our existence, the summer of 2009, to create a training program to train high school students, so students between the ages of 13 and 8 and 17 really, to do investigative reporting. Because in our country, to get into college, to get into a university, you have to have something on your resume, on your CV, which makes you unique. And so we thought, and parents look for this all the time for their children. We thought, well, an investigative reporting program is pretty unique to have on your resume if you're 15 or 16 or 17. So we created this program, and we had no idea how it was going to go. And we had about 20 to 24 students that first summer. They paid $900 each. After we paid everybody involved, we had about $16,000 left. We thought, okay, that worked. We had nobody staying in the dormitories because I didn't want to have to worry about students staying in dormitories. So then we tried it the next year by having them stay in the dormitories. And we went from 24 students to 40 students. And some of them stayed for 2 weeks. All of a sudden the revenue went from $18,000 or $20,000 or so to like $75,000 or $80,000. And then the following year we had them all stay for 2 weeks. And we had 54 students. And the revenue went to over $100,000. And then this summer we expanded it to 3 sessions. We had 68 students from 20 states and 7 countries. And the revenue went to $150,000.
Amazing.
And now we've hired somebody, because now it's so much of a business. And I was doing all of that work. We said, let's bring somebody in who can take this business to the next level. Because we know this is a viable business. This is a viable revenue stream. We created a certificate program in investigative reporting, mostly for international journalists. And the idea for that came when I spoke at a conference in Brazil in 2009 and spoke about our center. All these students came up to me and said, how do we come work at your center? And I thought, well, we'll create a program. We'll have to charge for it because we have to charge for things that we do. And we created this program. And so far in 2 years, we've had about 24 journalists from around the world, from every continent, come and take this program, this investigative reporting certificate program. It's unique in that we train people how to do investigative reporting while they're working on an investigative story. So it's a unique training program. Then we decided early on too that giving our stories away was not a business plan, was not a business. That we needed to charge for our stories.
And how actually, it's not quite clear for me, because here in Croatia what happens with investigative journalists, they usually leave the mainstream media because they're not free, they're not able to do their work within the media, because media are quite corrupted, as you know.
Right.
They won't do something which would damage their advertisements or their political influence, then they are paying through and related things. How you manage to sell your stories, which are investigative stories, to the same mainstream media which you quitted to work on because you weren't free to work on them?
Well, it wasn't a matter of not being free. So what was happening in all these media outlets, it's not like they don't want to do investigative reporting because they're corrupt or they don't want to anger certain elements of society. They don't want to do it because it costs money. So all of this was happening. This void was being created because either at newspapers or television stations they were trying to save money, and so they were getting rid of their investigative reporters or doing less of it because it takes time and money, right? So we know that the editors at these newspapers and the news directors at these television stations really do want to do investigative reporting. So we know there's a market for it. So we say to them, look, we can give you an investigative story once a month for $500 or sometimes less. If you were to hire an investigative reporter to do that same amount of reporting, it would cost you tens of thousands of dollars more. So, work with us. If you've already gotten to a point where you need more investigative reporting, but you don't have the staff to do it, work with us. And you'll be supporting our venture, and you'll be getting, high quality investigative reporting. So, last year, the fiscal year that ended the end of June, we took in $70,000 from selling our stories to various news outlets.
You know, here in Croatia, I see that our media are still kind of not willing to really threaten certain society elements. They should be society correctives, but they are not. What's the difference in between Croatian and United States media in that sense? How your media evolved to the sense that they are only frightened to the expenses that investigative journalists would have?
In the history of journalism in the United States, dating back to the 1700s, when you think about how it started with people writing pamphlets that were partisan. You know, they were for one party or another. And then really most of the media in the United States until the beginning of the 20th century was partisan media. It was media in one party's corner or another party's corner, right? But then the big media moguls like Pulitzer and Hearst realized as America changed, as more immigrants came into America, as the cities got bigger, that it was no longer profitable to aim at a niche audience like Democrats or Republicans. It was, you'd make more money by aiming at a broader audience. And then they quickly realized that if you report on these major issues, if you become the critic, really, if you become the watchdog, and you examine what's wrong with government or what's wrong with business, that people will read the stories. They will, you know, television eventually realize
it will sell them.
It will sell. So I think that when it really, you know, I mean, watchdog journalism is embedded in the journalism tradition in the United States. So investigative reporting is embedded in that tradition. But I think there's that. So it's deep. People are passionate about it, that own newspapers, that are editors in newspapers, that work, you know, as editors in television, that work as reporters in television, as producers in television. So it's a part of our culture. At the same time, for example, in local television news, the business consultants have said, investigative reporting sells. It'll attract viewers. You do investigative reporting, people will watch your newscast. So there's a profit motive too. So they've learned, and I don't really understand why in Croatia, the people who want to make money in the media here don't realize that being a critical watchdog of government and of big business and of big institutions will sell newspapers, will sell news broadcasts, that you can make incredible amounts of money by being that watchdog.
Yeah, I guess it's a small market, and it's more of the payment that you're getting back in washing different kind of interest of politicians and profit than to really sell on the market and inform
I tell you,
citizens.
if they did the numbers, I'm sure they would learn pretty quickly that you'd make a lot more money.
Oh really, we need your advices here.
From bribery. Yeah, but because there's money to be made. This is a developing nation, obviously. Your economy is going to be just getting better and better over time. And so the money will be made from people buying products, from advertising. And so when the people who own your newspapers and own your television outlets hopefully will learn that they can make an incredible amount of money by doing serious watchdog journalism.
And do you have an issue of securing the investigative journalist work in your organization? Because we still here facing that investigative journalists are threatened if they are working on the story which can damage certain interests. Well, how you preserve that security of your people?
Reporters. Yeah. Well, you know, there are stories occasionally where you get threats, but it's rare in our country that journalists are killed. It's just rare. I mean, there are two instances, and I think they're both instructive. There was a fellow named Don Bowles in the 1970s. He was reporting on organized crime in Arizona, the state of Arizona, and they killed him. Car bomb killed him. So journalists all over the United States banded together, a group of them, and said, "We're not going to let that happen." They went to Arizona. They finished the reporting that Don Bowles was engaged in. And they brought the killers to justice. It happened again in California when this radical Muslim group killed Chauncey Bailey from the Oakland Tribune. Again, a group of journalists came together. They finished the reporting. They found the killers. They helped find the killers. So I think the message has been sent in the United States if you kill a journalist, you will pay the price. You will pay the price. So you can't scare us, because if you try to kill one of us, it's not like the story is going to go away.
And it happened because of the solidarity of journalists among each other. And how you get there, how you make those people solidar with each other?
Well, I mean, it takes organizations. Most journalism is a small community, and we always say in the U.S. that everybody knows everybody in journalism, whether it's in newspapers or television. It's a small world. So if, God forbid, one of you was murdered in the course of doing a story, you would hope that your colleagues would come together to help finish the reporting that you did and find the people who killed you. I mean, so there is collegiality in here as there is in the United States. So you would just hope that would happen here.
What kind of non-profit media do you have?
The history of non-profit journalism, as I said, goes back. I remember when I was in high school myself, I used to subscribe to something called I.F. Stone's Weekly. I.F. Stone was an investigative reporter who was, I forget where he was working, decided to leave and start his own basically non-profit. Well, it was giving him a salary, but started his own little pamphlet. But the real history of nonprofit journalism begins in 1977 when a group of journalists in California started the Center for Investigative Reporting. And they've been around now for 35 years, mostly through foundation money. Foundations and grants. They did a lot of documentary work where they would get foundation money, and public television would pay them some money for documentaries that would be on this show Frontline on PBS. They did that for years and years and years. And then about 4 years ago, at the same time we were thinking about starting our center, that center changed a little bit. In 1990, the Center for Public Integrity in Washington was formed by a former 60 Minutes show producer who decided that he wanted to create something that really did serious investigative reporting focused on Washington. Okay? And he, through foundation grants mostly, that center still exists, still flourishes 22 years later, mostly from foundation money. Okay? ProPublica came along when Rupert Murdoch bought the Wall Street Journal. Paul Steiger, who was the editor of the Wall Street Journal, decided to leave, decided to create, and had known this very wealthy family in California, Sandler family, who gave him $10 million a year to start ProPublica, right? So again, it came from a philanthropic donation. And then what happened was, when we started our center, and many other centers started right afterwards, this movement to start these nonprofit journalism centers became huge. It's a huge movement. There's 75 now. There are about 1,500 people working for them. The total budgets of all these organizations is over, I forget the exact figure, it's like $170 million or something like that. It's a lot of money, and that's come about really only recently, really in the past 3 to 4 years. So the flourishing of nonprofit journalism is a fairly new phenomenon in the United States. And it really has to do with the passion that people have, these people who are creating these centers have to continue doing strong journalism, strong reporting. I mean, there's some exceptions to the history I just defined. There's a group of people in St. Louis, Missouri, who had been working at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for years. The paper started laying off people, and those reporters got the family that had owned the newspaper, the Pulitzer family had owned the newspaper, they got that family to contribute money to establish something called the St. Louis Beacon, which is an online, nonprofit news organization that does a lot of investigative reporting. In Minneapolis, Joel Klein, who was the publisher of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, when he left, he, with his own money I guess he had made when the Star-Tribune was sold, started something called the Min Post, an online, nonprofit news organization that relies on subscriber fees, a little bit of advertising, but mostly subscriber fees like National Public Radio to sustain the organization. In San Diego, the Voice of San Diego is a nonprofit news organization that's only been established again in the past 4 years. underwritten by one very rich man in San Diego who was really supportive of this venture. His name is Buzz Woolley. But in addition to that, now they sell their content to TV stations. There are donors, there are subscribers. I mean, usually all of these organizations rely on multiple forms, multiple aspects of funding.
And the state support, is it present at all?
Not at all. It's very controversial. You know, even though national public radio and public television in the United States, which is semi-state supported, semi-government supported, has been around for a long time, and are considered, you know, very high level. They do very high level journalism. Even though that's the case, most journalists rebel at the notion of government supporting journalism. So this discussion it's come up many times in the past 4 years, where we've said in groups, you know, should we be thinking about turning to government for support? I think eventually that door will open, that organizations like ours and bigger ones will say, yes, we'll take a limited grant from the government maybe to do this one thing and we'll try it. I mean, the concern is that the public perception will be that then you are in bed with the government, that somehow you are now involved in a conflict of interest. That how will you ever be able to report on the government if they are giving you money, right? And I think, you know, you could ask that same question for national public radio and public television, and what they would tell you is there's a wall. There's a wall between our funders and the journalism that we do. As long as that wall remains, you know, high and strong, there won't be a conflict of interest. There won't be a problem in that respect. And I think that eventually might happen with these other centers.
We are struggling to improve status of non-profit media in Croatia because non-profit media are almost not existing here, and the journalism and the journalist status is lower and lower. So we really need a kind of different model, different approach, something new that would emerge that would secure the pluralism of media and the quality informing of citizens. What you would recommend to Croatia, in a sense? You've been here for several days, I guess, and you get at least a light of picture how the things are standing in our media sphere.
What's important to note is that what's best in one place is not what's best in another place. The models that have worked in the United States may never work here, but I think you have to figure it out for yourself, really what's going to work. I mean, if there's no history of philanthropy here, that's a challenge, you know. But the reality is there must be some philanthropy here. People have given to museums, they've given to universities, they've probably given to hospitals. I mean, people give, so you need to find those people and convince them to support this kind of work. You know, foundations are going to be, you know, will likely be a source of revenue for you to help you get something like this started. So I think looking to foundations and then figuring out what possible revenue streams work in this environment. Maybe this idea of training that works for us might necessarily not work here, like it probably wouldn't work in St. Louis, Missouri either, or probably wouldn't work in a lot of places in the United States. You just need to figure out what would work. As I was saying to somebody else here, I was asking, like, who owns your major grocery stores? Because they make a lot of money. So in the United States, those people are philanthropic. Who owns your car dealerships? You know, because in the United States, those people are very wealthy.
Our main grocery stores are owned by a person who owns the distribution channels of the press in Croatia.
Of the press? Really? I can tell you one thing, that if you don't think about it in the business sense, then probably it won't sustain itself. Because you've got to figure out, in addition to donations and foundation funding, how will you raise money? How will you bring in the money that will allow you to survive long term? I mean, I think you got to think about it.
Yeah, for that we also need the media literacy among the people, among the citizens. Would you price the media literacy in United States high, in the sense that it's there to support approach that you are talking about?
You know, it's new. The whole media literacy movement in the United States is very new. And it comes mostly as a reaction to really what happens on talk radio in the United States and on talk television on the cable networks. That there's concern that Americans cannot tell the difference between opinion and journalism. And there is a big difference. So, I mean, that's a very new trend. I mean, will that if people understand media more, will they be more supportive of serious investigative journalism? Yeah. Can we? But I'll be dead probably by the time that whole movement catches fire enough to change a country as big as the United States. I think deep down inside, most people in most places, if you do a really strong investigative story, they're going to read it, they're going to watch it, because it's really what they like. It's really, I don't think someone's going to look at it and say, I'm not going to read that because it's about something serious, or it's I think that in fact people really do love that kind of journalism. So I don't know if you have to train people to love that kind of journalism. I mean, in the United States, when you talk about your media being sensational, there is all kinds of sensational media in the United States. There are tabloids. There are supermarket tabloids that are ridiculously sensational. There are television shows that focus solely on celebrities. There are television shows that solely focus on sports. But people still have an appetite for news, for serious news, because it impacts their daily life. Government impacts all of us. Big institutions impact all of us. I mean, big business impacts all of us. And that's what, more than Britney Spears or Lindsay Lohan have no impact on us, as far as I could tell.
Godinama razgovaramo o statusu medija u Hrvatskoj, 2012. je. Što vam se čini, ide li taj status medija naprijed, ima li unapređenja ili općenito mediji imaju sve lošiji status u Hrvatskoj?
Pa ima nekih što bi se reklo, tehničkih i možda i nekih kvantitativnih unapređenja, ali zapravo ako govorimo o kvaliteti, a to je ipak ono što je bitno u sadržaju, i ako govorimo o novinarima, onda je to njihov položaj, socijalni i profesionalni. Mislim da napretka nema, odnosno da smo pa i u lošim stanju, jer sad smo doista svjedoci baš, ajde da kažemo, posljednjih godinu, dvije, da novinari sve češće gube posao. To je ono bazično, socijalni problem, da se može negdje raditi, ne samo da gube posao, nego rade za manji novac nego prije. Dakle, imali smo ove godine nekoliko listova se ugasilo, što se prije nije događalo, osim sporadično. Dakle, gledajući na to je situacija lošija. Što se tiče kvalitete novinarstva, često kad govorimo o novinarstvu, onda nekako bazično mislim na tisak, jer je to ipak, šta bi se reklo,
preteča ozbiljnog novinarstva.
Tako je, to je kao ono ozbiljno novinarstvo bilo, pa je tako to ostalo. Onda se vidi to da ne možemo govoriti o većoj kvaliteti nego o manje. Dakle, čak mislim da su i informacije, da ima više i loših informacija, neprovjerenih, ako govorimo o tome. Ako s druge strane mi nemamo ono što bi trebalo biti novinarstvo, što se kaže watchdog, toga je sve manje. Dakle, doista manje tih analiza, manje društvenih kritika, nemamo foruma, sučeljavanja, recimo, mišljenja intelektualaca, javnosti, općenito o nekim bitnim pitanjima, kuda zemlja ide i tako, ovim teškim pitanjima koje je teško odgovoriti. Prije smo imali u svim medijima, mislim, dakle, na televiziji javnoj pogotovo, i u novinama, ovim najvećim novinama, takve rasprave. To nisu striktno političke rasprave, nego su rasprave ljudi koji nešto mogu reći o nekim važnim problemima.
A istraživačko novinarstvo, vaša karijera je u stvari iz tiskanih medija, i to iz dnevnog i informativnog medija. Vi konkretno radite u Novom listu i dugi niz godina ste sjedili u redakciji. Ima li u takvim redakcijama danas prostora za istraživačko novinarstvo? Možete li dobiti privilegiju mjesec dana raditi na priči ukoliko je to potrebno i pri tome imati podršku glavnog urednika?
Ne, mislim da ako je to još bilo moguće i do prije 5 godina, doista da je bilo striktno istraživačkih novinara koji nisu bili opterećeni drugim poslovima, sada ih više niko za to ne plaća. Ja mislim da je osjetan nekako pad čak broja tih istraživačkih priča ako govorimo o mainstream medijima. Dakle, neke istraživačke priče postoje u ovim ne rubnim, ali ovim medijima koji nisu glavni mediji. Dakle, sigurno i da vlasnicima ne odgovara nekontrolirano istraživačko novinarstvo. Mi vidimo ono što naliči možda na prvi pogled na istraživačko novinarstvo, znači puno dokumenata curi i iz sudskih procesa pa i ponešto drugo, ali nekako čovjek to shvaća uvijek kao nekakav poželjen interes, često baš vlasnika lista, da te neke informacije dobije i plasira preko svojih novinara. Dakle, to nije ono što je učinjeno jednim velikim novinarskim trudom i što nije istraženo autentično, nego je dobijen.
Hoćete reći da se neke teme u stvari, odnosno neki interesi prelamaju preko nekih novina, a neki drugi se ne diraju jer su u toj liniji?
Tako je, to je sigurno, da. Dakle, to je ono što može vlasnik svojim utjecajem napraviti i mislim da je to, očito nije to samo u Hrvatskoj, to je dakle manje više svugdje je taj jedan utjecaj vlasnika, ali upravo zbog toga i mi kao Hrvatsko novinarsko društvo često inzistiramo baš na neovisnosti redakcija koje svakako nije to dostignuto, da se zna što je redakcija, što radi glavni urednik.
Kako se bira glavni urednik?
Kako se bira glavni urednik prije svega, dakle on mora biti puno bliži novinarima nego što je danas.
Nego vlasniku.
Pa da, nego vlasniku, a kako vrijeme ide sve obratan trend. Znači on je sve bliži vlasniku, a sve dalji od novinara.
I od interesa javnosti, ja bih rekla.
Pa da. Mislim, kad govorimo o vlasnicima, svugdje nekakav utjecaj postoji. Međutim, on ne smije nikako biti vidljiv. Treba se znati pravila igre koja su, govorimo i o statutima medija, koja bi trebala ta pravila igre omogućiti i uvijek je pitanje snage, i moralne snage uredništva da radi pravi urednički posao, da se i suprotstavi vlasniku kad to treba.
Brojni su problemi u hrvatskim medijima i mi ćemo s vama sigurno imati još priliku razgovarati o njima vrlo skoro. The US Embassy gave a quite big contribution in democracy developments in Croatia in the last 20 years. Can you tell us what is the focus of your work currently?
Well, we're here today at a 2-day conference on regional media and looking at traditional values in the media, what are the core elements of professional journalism, and how do they apply to the region here, and more particularly the challenges that we're facing in this new media environment. As you're looking at some of the challenges this region faces, we're trying to not only talk about those and share ideas, but come up with some constructive solutions. We brought people from 6 other countries besides Croatia. So, the challenges facing journalists and media houses don't stop at the borders. Certainly when you look at investigative journalism as well, the problems don't stop at borders. So it really is a regional initiative. And so that's talks a little bit about the policy and the goals that the United States Embassy is working on with Croatia around democracy development and, of course, freedom of speech and the media being a core value there. but also in this idea of regionalization and using Croatia as a model for its other neighbors in the region. And in this particular
And
case,
is Croatia mature to be a model for the whole region?
certainly is. Croatia in many ways is seen as a model, certainly as a NATO member, most recently coming up to the European Union. Your neighbors are looking to Croatia as, you know, how you did it, how can they do it, and sharing some examples. And you know, I think at least in the United States model, some of the challenges, some of the hurdles, some of the declines that you saw in 2007, 2008, 2009 have really turned the corner. And as some of our speakers have mentioned here, it's a new age, it's a golden age of investigative reporting. And I think that is on its way here in Croatia as well. And so if we can share some of our ideas and some of our tactics and methods and sources, we might be able to speed up that process a little bit and certainly try to share those again with media houses in the region. But the whole idea here is that our U.S. Embassy is not living in isolation in Buzin. We're really trying to partner with our Croatian colleagues when we do our programming, and it's really important that citizens in this region are informed. They're able to make informed decisions based on accurate and comprehensive news and information. Ideally, that would, you know, help improve the condition in the lives of people in this area, particularly when you look at some of the challenges that may come up in organized crime. And we want to make sure that journalists have all the tools and tactics that they can to try to address these issues.
Besides of lots of talk on profit media here on this conference and the problems that profit media are facing today in the region, the non-profit media were quite important part of the conference.
Right.
As a concept, it's quite new, and I guess the majority of public still here in Croatia is not familiar, and we are really struggling quite much to really improve the status of non-profit media in Croatia. How you observe that status today, and what you can say as an advice in a sense of strengthening that sector and media developing there?
Yeah, I think people, citizens of Croatia, are going to go where they've got professional news, where they've got good sources, where they're getting good information. So if we can come up with nonprofit institutions and organizations that are providing that service, people will go to those sources. We've just looked at a couple examples here of Croatian nonprofit media, and they are interesting. They were talking about, well, at least as of last year, 30,000 monthly visits. She indicated that's certainly higher today. 10,000 on some other cultural websites. So it's coming, it's significant, it's important, but it's not going to happen overnight. And it's again something that the state is going to have to help. You know, the journalists themselves are going to have to help, but you really have to try to come up with some creative ways to deal with economic realities here. Find new and innovative ways to do things online, again using social media. And I think that's the reason for this conference here, is to talk about what are some of those options, what are some of those alternatives, what has worked well in other places, and then apply the models and pieces of those models that would work well here. And again, it doesn't happen overnight. It's kind of a cultural shift, but certainly things have shifted and developed very significantly here in the past 15, 20 years.
Are the media freedoms secured in the United States?
Oh, the media freedoms are not secure anywhere. We probably still have more in the U.S. than other countries, but governments and big companies are, you know, systematically trying to restrict our freedom to use media in the way we want to.
And who would you say that influence media more today? The companies, the magnates, or the politicians?
I'm not sure I'd pick. It would depend where and what the
or they are interrelated.
Was. But the technology, media, people in media have to recognize that when they use certain platforms and technologies, they are working on someone else's platform and that they don't own it. Facebook, for example. If you do your journalism on Facebook, Facebook has a lot of control. And That's something I think journalists don't recognize. However, there still are alternatives for publishing, and governments have more power in most ways than anybody to change freedom in media.
How actually the United States of America deals with ownership of media getting into the hands of very few people? It's a huge market and it's a huge profit that it's developed on media.
Well, ownership has been a big issue in America, but it's not one that I've thought to be a very difficult problem lately, because we have the internet to do what we wish with. The worry I have is that ownership is taking a different form with the internet, and that is that the internet service providers, and in most American cities that will be, and communities, it'll be really one or two that have the control of our access and are insisting that they should also have the control over the content on the pipes. That's extremely more dangerous, by far more dangerous, than all of the ownership issues of the past. And I worry a lot about that. And the same thing with the mobile carriers that have even more restrictions than the wired line carriers. So yes, media consolidation is still an issue, especially in broadcasting, but it's, I think the issue of who controls the internet access is going to be a bigger one.
Can you maybe mention some of United States experiences which might be applicable here in the region, which you find, just with a short overview, what you would say that it would be most useful for us to think about as a model in this particular moment of time?
I think the most useful way to look at this is to try everything. It doesn't cost much to try anything. Therefore, try everything and see what works, see what doesn't. Understand that many new things won't work, but that's not something to despair over, but to learn from and then try new things. I have a friend named Esther Dyson, who is a technologist and investor and a former journalist, and she is one of her best pieces of advice I've ever heard is to always make new mistakes.
Zemina Jaroš gleda vas 20 sekundi u tišini. Točno toliko godina Zemina čeka priznanje svoje patnje. Ona je civilna žrtva rata. Obitelji djece poginule u ratu imaju pravo na materijalno obeštećenje od institucija i zaslužuju priznavanje svoje patnje u društvu. Žrtve su predugo čekale.